Did you know that China's state construction empire is secretly influencing the most expensive projects in America? This empire is so powerful that it's reshaping the entire global infrastructure landscape. How did they manage to outmaneuver the U.S. in building the future? In this video, we're going to explore the strategic brilliance behind China's construction dynasty, which is quietly transforming America's infrastructure. Stick with us as we uncover how a single Chinese company quietly positioned itself behind billions of dollars worth of infrastructure across the U.S. The emergence of China's infrastructure powerhouse. The journey of China's construction empire began in 1957, but it wasn't until the 1980s that the world started to see the true ambition of the China State Construction Engineering Corporation, CSCC. What began as a government initiative to modernize China's own infrastructure has now blossomed into a global empire under the leadership of Chairman Jiang Shuquan. CSCC grew into a $320 billion business that dwarfs many national economies in revenue. By 2025, this empire was behind some of the most expensive projects worldwide, from roads to ports to airports, and it quickly set its sights on America's own infrastructure. The significant realization came when U.S. officials discovered just how strategically China had positioned itself within the global infrastructure network. While the United States had only spent $76 billion on international infrastructure over the past decade, China's state construction dynasty had pumped over $679 billion into construction projects across 155 countries, building roads, railways, ports, and even power plants. But what shocked American officials wasn't just China's global dominance. It was what China had been quietly doing on U.S. soil all this time. China's strategic moves in America. China's involvement in the U.S. infrastructure industry began in 2006 when China Construction America, CCA, a subsidiary of CSCC, established a strong foothold in the U.S. However, regulatory barriers in the U.S. prevented them from directly building America's most lucrative infrastructure projects. But that didn't stop China. Instead, they employed a more subtle strategy: acquisition. They began purchasing American infrastructure assets piece by piece. Over the course of several years, Chinese investors quietly accumulated more than $350 billion worth of real estate across 40 states, targeting prime locations in major cities, near airports, ports, and military bases. What started as small investments began to snowball into a larger strategy to control and influence the U.S. infrastructure market without having to build it themselves. The game changer: strategic acquisitions. One of the most publicized acquisitions occurred in 2012 when Chinese billionaire Wang Jinlin's Dalian Wonder Group bought AMC Theaters for $2.6 billion, making China the world's largest movie theater operator. While on the surface, this seemed like an ordinary business investment, there was much more to it. The purchase of AMC represented China's growing influence on American cultural infrastructure, controlling how millions of Americans experienced entertainment, advertisements, and Chinese influence in their daily lives. But Wang Jinlin wasn't the only player in this game. Chinese state enterprises were targeting far more than just cultural assets. They were acquiring land near critical infrastructure, such as military bases and ports. For example, Fufeng Group, a Chinese agriculture giant, purchased 370 acres of land near Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota for a $700 million corn mill project. This location was carefully chosen to provide China with influence over an important military site, a strategy that alarmed U.S. security agencies and Congress. The Chinese were no longer just passive investors. They had learned from America's past and turned its free market principles into tools for strategic positioning. China's coordinated effort, a unified dynasty. What truly set China's strategy apart was a coordination between various state-owned enterprises. Unlike the fragmented approach that most corporations adopt, China's infrastructure giants didn't compete. They worked together under the same centralized authority to achieve a common goal. China Communications Construction Company, China National Petroleum Corporation, and China Railway Group were all part of this coordinated effort. Each company contributed its expertise, whether in port engineering, high-speed rail systems, or energy infrastructure, to build a global empire that reached into the heart of American infrastructure. By the time American officials realized the full scope of Chinese influence, it was already too late. China had established a powerful presence, not just in the construction sector, but in key economic and strategic positions across the U.S. Why buy America's infrastructure instead of building it? Why did China choose this subtle method of acquisition instead of just directly constructing infrastructure? The answer lies in the regulatory hurdles that made it difficult for foreign companies to build directly in America. The solution, however, was simple. Buy the companies that win construction contracts. Why build new infrastructure when they could acquire existing assets that already generate revenue? In 2014, CCA took a significant step by acquiring Plaza Construction, a leading American construction management firm. This acquisition gave CCA access to valuable relationships with U.S. developers, knowledge of local regulations, and credibility in the U.S. market, essential tools for their long-term strategic positioning. The Global Belt and Road Initiative, China's master plan. In 2013, China launched its Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, a global infrastructure development and investment strategy aimed at creating a trade and economic network across Asia, Europe, and Africa. However, the true impact of this initiative wasn't just felt in Asia. It quietly reshaped the American landscape as well. While the U.S. was focused on Chinese activities in Africa and Asia, the real game was unfolding in America, where Chinese companies were positioning themselves at the center of critical infrastructure. This massive acquisition strategy continued under the radar, unnoticed by most Americans, but when the full scope was revealed, it was truly breathtaking. The Chinese strategy, buying real estate for influence. Chinese companies had quietly accumulated over $350 billion worth of American real estate, spanning commercial buildings, residential complexes, hotels, and office spaces. But the real strategy behind these acquisitions was more than just financial gain. It was about positioning. Chinese state enterprises weren't just buying properties. They were securing strategic locations near military installations, transportation hubs, and ports. In California, for example, mysterious buyers spent nearly $1 billion acquiring farmland around Travis Air Force Base. This raised alarms within the U.S. government, as the land was critical to national security. What was happening in America wasn't random. Chinese investors were targeting assets that would provide them with power and influence over America's economic future. China's growing power, America's diminishing influence. As China's influence grew, the U.S. began to fall behind. America's once proud infrastructure system, including the interstate highway system, began to deteriorate. Bridges were crumbling, highways were congested, and airports needed major upgrades. In contrast, China's state-owned enterprises were building the world's tallest buildings, longest bridges, and most advanced transportation systems. What's more, China's state enterprises were able to build and maintain these massive projects in a fraction of the time it took America to plan similar projects. While America took decades to complete its interstate system, China was building entire infrastructure networks across continents in just a few years. America's response: is it too late? The discovery of China's strategic acquisitions in America has led to a dramatic shift in American policy. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, and new regulations regarding foreign investments have all been enacted to counter China's growing influence. American officials finally realized that infrastructure isn't just about roads and bridges. It's about power and influence on a global scale. The story of China's state construction dynasty is one of careful planning, strategic investments, and a coordinated effort that spans decades. What started as a small office in Atlanta in 1985 has evolved into the world's largest infrastructure empire. And while the U.S. focused on maintaining its aging infrastructure, China quietly outmaneuvered them, positioning themselves as the dominant power in global infrastructure. What will America do to respond? Can they regain control of their infrastructure? Only time will tell. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth analysis of global power plays. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.